In mezzo al rumore serve qualcosa che duri.
Il Papa Leon XIV.
Storie vere. Incontri che cambiano la vita. Persone che costruiscono. Uno sguardo originale su ciò che accade. Tutto questo è Tracce. Ora anche in una nuova versione digitale. Per raccontare sempre più storie di gente che vive. Tracce, la rivista internazionale di Comunione e Liberazione.
È bello avere quello che ti serve quando ti serve. Come il programma Easy Token Collection, per accumulare punti da trasformare in premi. Easy Bank, la banca digitale di Intesa Sanpaolo.
In mezzo al rumore serve qualcosa che duri.
Il Papa Leon XIV.
Storie vere. Incontri che cambiano la vita. Persone che costruiscono. Uno sguardo originale su ciò che accade. Tutto questo è Tracce. Ora anche in una nuova versione digitale. Per raccontare sempre più storie di gente che vive. Tracce, la rivista internazionale di Comunione e Liberazione.
È bello avere quello che ti serve quando ti serve. Come il programma Easy Token Collection, per accumulare punti da trasformare in premi. Easy Bank, la banca digitale di Intesa Sanpaolo.
Questo è un luogo che genera dialogo,
Qualcuno che si impegna, che si batte.
che approfondisce la conoscenza e sostiene la fiducia. È un crocevia dove si incontra chi desidera il vero, il bello, il giusto e il bene. È una testimonianza di speranza nel cuore ferito del presente. E tutto questo
Proporre con la propria vita.
esiste anche grazie a te.
Buonasera e benvenuti.
Good afternoon and welcome everybody to this session in which we are going to talk about the masters of the world. We'd rather say the new masters of the world. We have three well-known guests. They all have a well-established and long-lasting experience in the world of journalism, politics, and the economy. I would like to welcome Monica Maggioni, journalist and host of In Mezzora.
Stefano.
And then Stefano Lucchini, Group Chief Institutional Affairs and External Communication Officer, Intesa, Sanpaolo.
E Luciano.
And Luciano Violante, President of the Associazione Futuri, Probabili. We would like to start off this session with part of the statement that was delivered by Pope Francis yesterday in the auditorium. Let us then free sharing from suspicion, culture from power, and education from ideology, and work from idolatry of profit, and technology and finance from the business of death. Starting with the organizations that we generated and in which we operate, let us reveal the unjust power relations that are at the roots of poverty and inequality, of war, of environmental disasters. Let us disarm technological development when it is too pervasive and destructive. Courageous pioneers are necessary to start changing their route, to make it convincible and reliable, to have a real conversion for everybody. Well, this is definitely a very demanding point because there is a call here for taking on our responsibilities at a personal level, but also as a group in politics, in intermediate bodies, and social groups. We want to address this big challenge from a geopolitical point of view. We are witnessing highly disruptive and rapidly accelerating changes, which are also very difficult to understand. And given that understanding is the first step that is required of us to take on our political and social responsibilities in our debates, in our thinking, we want to take this opportunity this evening to take one more step forward in these new constellations of power and conflicts. And this is a very hard and difficult work, and dialogue is necessary. Let me contextualize this challenge that we have now. After the Second World War, the states got together to create the United Nations in an attempt to diminish conflict and to have at least some dialogue, possible dialogue among the nations. In fact, the world then got divided into two blocks. There was not a real war, there was a Cold War. And then, with the fall of the Iron Curtain, a growing globalization stage has started with the growing multilateralism. And during these years, after all, we thought that things were going well, but that was not the case. From multilateralism, we got to multipolarism. New actors have stepped into the global scene, China first and foremost, and then Brazil, the United Arab Emirates, and other emerging powers that have become increasingly powerful. And I stop here because the list would be really long and complex. And then globalization also stopped. it turned itself into an economic global conflict, a sort of economic war that was sparked by the United States. To this, we have to add the Russian invasion in Ukraine and the really bad explosion of the conflict between Israel and Palestine. And so we are now in a situation of increasingly strong conflicts where new powers have stepped in, like technological powers with financial potential too, that is a sort of military force that is really threatening the whole balance among the nations. This is our situation. So I want to address the first question to Luciano Violante, but I want to show you a short video of an interview with the President of the United States.
Power on the world stage. Is there anything that could stop you if you wanted to?
Yeah, there's one thing, my own morality, my own mind. It's the only thing that can stop, and that's law. Very good. I don't need international law. I'm not looking to hurt people.
Well, this is really incredible. I don't need international law. That's what President Trump said. Well, with his way of behaving, Trump probably said something that many people try to implement, in fact. So, Mr. Violante, what has happened? We got here after many years where international law had been recognized, and now we have the President of the United States coming up with this statement when they were really the creator of international law. Well, first of all, international law is different from national law for this reason. National law is based on strength, because if a citizen breaks the law in its own state, there is the governing bodies, the authorities that try to recover the situation or to punish the citizen. International law, on the other hand, has nobody punishing the violators. And it is based on consensus. It is based on consensus of different parties, of international subjects that find agreement on some basic rules. And this mechanism now has played up. Now let me be clear. There are authoritarian figures like Putin, Netanyahu, Erdogan. They have always been there. But before, what we had was the West, intended as the European Union or Europe at the time. Well, European Union or Europe, and then the United States, and then countries that had joined, like Australia, New Zealand, Japan, that were liberal democratic countries that were counterbalancing the situation with the dictators. Dictators didn't have an easy life, because on this side of the world we had the strongest economic and military power, that is the United States. Now the things have changed. Why is it not the case anymore? Well, the strategic prospects of the United States, in a document that was signed by President Trump some months ago, refers to the Western Hemisphere, which does not include Europe. It refers to the Americas, and then it talks about Europe separately. He refers to the fact that he is against the European Union, and he only wants to establish relations with healthy nations, healthy countries in Europe, not with all of them, because Europe is a stronghold with all its defects, if you like, but it's the only liberal democratic continent in the world today. It is the only one. There's no one else like us. So we really have to cling to this quality. We are a liberal democratic country because there is the European Union. On the other side, this is meant to be fragmented and crashed because there are other states. Consider that the press informed some days ago that the American administration would have sent a request to all member states of the European Union whether they were faithful to their administration and to Donald Trump. That is a question of being faithful to and loyal to one person. Now things are so different. Europe is the only obstacle, basically, to a dominion of some great powers, powerful subjects that are not democratic. They're not powerful democratic subjects. So I believe that first one has to be aware of this European quality. Then one has to attempt to strengthen liberal democratic values. Next year, there will be so many countries where elections will be held, in Poland, in Germany, in Italy, in Spain, and so on and so forth. And the future of the European Union will be decided there, probably the future of the entire world. Because if there is a balance in the world, it's because of the European Union. If the European Union takes a different route from the current one, the liberal democratic one, of course, there will be serious problems everywhere in the world. And the thing that most struck me, and I stop here, is that Trump bombarded Iran, which doesn't have the nuclear bomb, and he shook hand to the head of North Korea, saying that he has 57 nuclear bombs. The one that has 57 nuclear bombs, he shook his hand, and the one where there is no nuclear bomb was a bombardment. Well, we should think about these things. It's important to be informed, to try to understand, to get into the news, to the facts. And these encounters are useful for this reason. Of course, then reflection must go on, but we have to consider this fact that there is this sort of mechanism that is liberal and democratic because there is Europe. It won't be possible in a short time to resume the system of international law as we used to know it. But for now, we can still be an obstacle against something else that is a multipolarism that is in the hands of some authoritarian subjects, because the more worrying thing is that there are common views between Trump and Putin on the European Union. They want to eliminate it. So we have to defend ourselves on one side and on the other side. I think this is important that we know that.
Monica Maggioni.
Now, Monica Maggioni. Earlier, I have referred to Europe, and starting from Luciano Violante's statement, there is another challenge that has to face, that is technological and economic powers that certainly have a really strong power that some nations are not even able to face them on a legislative and political level. What are these powers and what are the features of these powers? Well, first of all, it's really beautiful to see all these people here try to understand what's going on in the world. So this is already something good. And then it is hard to understand what's going on now. One of the statements that are frequently heard is that it's very chaotic, everything is unstable, there is no logic, and so who can say what's going to happen? Well, no, that's not the case. There are logics behind that, there are dots that can be connected, and there is the possibility to try and become aware of what the current logics are there. Let's consider, for example, this pattern of interconnections. Well, this pattern, now we can see it in the screen. It's behind me. I couldn't see it before. Well, that pattern could work until some years ago. It looked quite complex, but it would tell us about the relations between states because of exchanges, commerce, energy balances, financial balances, financial questions, historical questions. It was a very complex figure, but it had some kind of logic, and it would be helpful to rationalize all this in some way. But then something started to happen. And one may say, well, come on, there is a very disruptive president that got to power in the United States. It's out of any logic. We've seen it at the beginning of our session, and everything is being disrupted. Is that true? Well, it is true, but it is not true at the same time, because should that be true, it would mean this. In 2 years, we have elections, and Trump shouldn't be there, but then we'll talk about the institutional level of all these things. Well, up until now, considering the rules of the game that we have now, Trump cannot be a candidate. So the Trump era should be over, and we can go back to the situation in which we used to be until 2 years ago. But that's not the case. We can't go back. And the fact that we can't go back is due not to just the fact that the impact of the decisions of the last few months is really strong. We can't go back because other things are occurring at the same time. We saw in February that Trump, together with Netanyahu, engaged war against Iran, believing that it would be a short war. Well, let's leave it aside for the short war, because the Iraq war was 2003 when I went there to document it, and then 3 years later we were still there. That too was supposed to be a short war. But there are other factors now that are governing the dynamics of conflicts. And for example, one of these is wrongly conceived sense of geopolitics. If I asked about the Strait of Hormuz a couple of months ago, would people know where it was? I don't think so. But there are physical straits, physical bottlenecks that can become really disruptive factors in the situation where somebody may win a war. Or let's consider what is happening between Russia and Ukraine. It was clear that Russia's military superiority was there, and nobody would have bet on Ukraine to hold against Russia. But now, in that very short piece of land where there is such a strong war, there are drones, there are robots, there's no even a human soldier there. What's going there? What's going on there? Is it Trump's presidency that is enough to tell us about what's going on in the world? No, there's something else. There is a sort of network that is above all the traditional pattern of power that we were used to. And now, Trump, who is replacing international law with himself, well, this is changing things, and there is a very complex pattern that is governed by one driving force, and is called technology. Technology shouldn't be looked at as an external factor. This is really a precondition of what we are reading about. Technology is relevant to borders conflicts because the raw materials situation and conflicts is really important. And raw materials are a determining factor in those conflicts. There is the questions of capitals, of influences, of powers, and technology is useful to understand the relationship between China and the United States. And that's the real hidden war, because China now is standing as a reference to the whole global South, and the United States are trying to regain their central role with respect to the West. So all this is useful to understand the great hostility against Europe. President Violante said, be careful, because Europe is the last democratic stronghold, and it is true, but it has the worst thing ever for the tech giant. One is taxation, that is capitals that are subtracted to innovation and reinvesting, and the other is called rules. And rules are also considered by subjects that are very straightforward and are very clear about what's going on. A person like Pope Leo XIV, for example, that was here yesterday with us at the meeting. So to conclude this part, I will take on technology later. If we today want to understand the world with the same logics that we used to understand it 24 months ago, well, we are completely wrong. Every interpretation must be filtered by the strong presence of technology. Even when Trump is talking about tariffs, he's talking about technology too, because tariffs right now are one of the strongest levers that Trump is using against anybody who is interfering with his development, technological development, also with respect to the relationship with China. Thank you.
Stefano.
Stefano Lucchini. So the relations among states have changed, but also internal relations have changed and internal rules when it comes to, economies. So things have changed as well in that respect. So in the past, politics was more important than economies. What is the situation today? Well, first of all, thank you very much for this opportunity, for this invitation. Thanks to the audience and thanks to the meeting for also these special editions, thanks to the visit of the Pope. So, the Masters of the World, I'll go back to the title. I don't want to be too pessimistic because I have some optimism bottom down, but what Luciano Violante said is absolutely right. So, about the last fortress of democracy, I think that this is true. And going back to what the Pope said yesterday, I think that as Europe, we should rediscover our roots somehow. So if we really were able to do that, I don't know if it was Gioberti, but if we rely on these words, that could be a good guiding idea. Who are the masters of the world today? We have seen so many of them over history. We have seen multinational companies. Today, they seem to be the masters of the world, but in the past, we saw emperors, kings. Masters of the world have always existed. Algorithm could be the new masters of the world. Why not? Technology certainly plays an important role. But let's not forget something else, something that goes back to the title of this year's meeting. The masters of the world, at one point, were considered to be the people who could publish and print books. In Mainz, in the past, there was a man who was, a jewel maker. He was graving jewels, but at one point he decides to grave mobile characters, and that is how printing was invented. That was such a disruptive revolution. So, it was not just about reading, of being read. Let's think about the Bible, but people could read directly and keep the book in their hands. And then I'll go back to technology in a minute. So that revolution brought about an important phenomenon because finally the consciousness of man could be changed. People could read the Bible at home, the Latin classics, and because of that, men could start forming their own opinions. And so that was revolutionary, and that brought about a great deal of change. So we are in 1450. There's the early printing. The first print was a Bible printed by Gutenberg. And then there was much more. In Venice, there were 200 printers. In Venice only, and Venice was considered as a point of reference in the whole world. So we had no idea of what Dante could be because there were manuscripts and manuscripts could not circulate. So this sentence by Dante for the first time was put in at the end of the book, of 1465, printed in a monastery, in particular in Santa Scholastica, Saint Scholastic Monastery. And we have this quote that is this year's meeting's title. The first one was made in 1472 in Foligno, in Umbria region. So this revolution was so meaningful, and I would like to somehow then refer to today's technology and AI. So printing gave us the opportunity to read Dante and to disseminate Dante's words. Last night we heard a wonderful lecture by a Dante specialist who somehow illustrated a number of very interesting aspects about the writing of the Divine Comedy and so on. But we have Dante, but later on people could read Shakespeare. And the trade-off was to have schisms, wars, the list of prohibited books, Inquisition at one point. So, I mean, very special things happened. So there was a trade-off. So on the one hand, we had a steep acceleration of change. On the other, we had some negative repercussions. Today, because of AI and because what is happening and the scenario being outlined, we will certainly have, on the one hand, a proliferating research work. So maybe in the near future, we'll be able to defeat cancer once and for all. But then there is another hot topic, our privacy, because maybe we're getting too much used to the use of something that is also generating distortions, and this is another important topic. Okay, I will stop. Okay, let's go back to that later on.
Partiamo.
Right. So those who could print have power. Correct. Yes, they had a lot of power. And some people, as a matter of fact, tried to stop the dissemination of printing. So Monica Maggioni showed a map of the world showing some traditional interconnections with national states. Well, that kind of a pattern, I mean, does not exist any longer. So how would you draw a plan of today's situation? Well, drawing a map of today's situation is almost impossible. I mean, because we need to consider the new centers of power. But what could be interesting today would be considering the somehow hidden Cold War, that is the rush towards AI that is being made both by China and the US, because de facto the new techno-oligarchs, the new real masters of the world are others. In January 2025, Trump swore in Washington, and the big masters of the big techs who were around him. At that point, there is the largest aggregation of private equity and of manipulation ability of the public and technological innovation in the same room around Trump. It was like a sort of augmented minds situation. And all of them certainly had the very same thing in mind. So if we were to go back to the bottom line, the battle, we could say, has been won by China, not because numbers are in favor of China, but because China has set the conditions to win the battle within a limited amount of time. In 2025, scientific publications have been measured. You know that every year these publications are measured. So in 2025, the number of scientific publications in AI have been measured. In China, there were 24,000 scientific publication. So somehow achieving the 19,000 publications made altogether in the US, UK, and EU. So this shows that AI in China is a real state project. Well, I don't want to appear as the one who thinks that technology and AI are something bad or something negative. Not at all. I agree with what Stefano Lucchini said and with the enormous potential of AI and the new technologies. But what needs to be understood is that we are not talking about a tool or a device. We are talking about that is going to be an underlying factor of our whole world, of our whole relations, something that will really have a deep impact on everything. That is why some people talk about an existential battle. So that's why it's important to look at what is happening in the US. Well, some people always reduce everything to this disruptive president that is totally unpredictable. But there are some things that are evolving in a very precise way. The people who were around Trump on the inauguration day are the very same people that today are pushing him very, very strongly towards this competition. They say that nothing can somehow come between this competition and the final goal, so winning over China. So on the one hand, there is the problem of Europe with its rules. But these people were around Trump, but unlike the first Trump's term, when he had relations, we had no relations with these people. Well, the relation was that of a president with major economic players. Today, everything is different because these people are now part of the White House, of the administration. Peter Thiel, Thiel, the surveillance mechanism, and the man who brings one day to Mar-a-Lago, J.D. Vance, and introduces him to Donald Trump, and today J.D. Vance is the vice president, are there because David Sachs, who was the czar of artificial intelligence, was at university with Peter Thiel, because there are too many interconnections between these people and their huge capitals. They know that they are much, much more powerful than states, as you said, Bernhard, but not so powerful today to be able to be 100% sure about winning over the competition that is underway with another world power that can rely on planning, modifications, adaptation of the whole industry towards a goal. And then there is something else in between, not just Europe. It's called democracy, it's called institutions, it's called democratic systems. So the main issue is to what extent these people who know are being involved in this battle that is the last challenge of all, the battle of battles, can tolerate the existence of democracy and its rules. So this is the big question and the big open issue.
Luciano Violante.
Luciano Violante, this is your question, because I think that over the last two editions of the meeting, we have talked so much about democracy and technology. Are they really friends? Well, can we show the slide that I prepared? Yeah, please. Well, while we wait for the slide, I want to say one thing. Oh, here it is. Yeah, look at it. That's the value of the 5 major digital companies, and you see the values. So the total value of the 5 most important European economies is lower than the total amount of these big companies. So you see that there is, a sort of incredible prevalence of economic power and state powers. Look at that, of the economic power of states. So when, the Pope talked about disarming technology, what he refers to. Okay, I think that we all remember when we were at school that the Enlightenment in France in the 18th century explained that you need the separation of powers, the governmental power, so the judiciary power, and the parliamentary power needs to be separate. Today we have a different separation, the political power and the digital power. And they should be disconnected, because if the political power is intertwined with digital power, it is dreadful, because the digital power knows everything about us. Technology knows everything about us. If you have a smartwatch, well, I don't want to say something against that, but those watches record everything, your heartbeat, your blood circulation, and these data are not for you, are data that circulate. They circulate. And what is important to know is this. Why is it so that when Americans and Israelis decide to target an opponent, they always target that very same opponent? Because we have this specificity. Fingerprints can be erased, the face can be changed with plastic surgery, the heartbeat cannot be changed. The heartbeat cannot be changed. Each and every one of us have their own heartbeat, so it is absolutely unique and personal. So the drones that hit the Red CMs, Mr. Rossi, have somehow embedded the heartbeat of Mr. Rossi. So drones are going to hit Mr. Rossi and nobody else. So the Israeli army asked Mr. Rossi, well, we are about to hit you. Do you want to die alone or with your family? And so Mr. Rossi goes out and is being killed. So you see, this is the interaction, the kind of interaction between military powers and digital technology. And this is not secondary at all, because on June 13, 2025, in Arlington, a military base of Virginia, 4 engineers and employees of important tech companies pledged loyalty to the U.S. Army. They are going to work 120 hours per year for the U.S. Army, and for the rest of the time they will work for their company. So they will make a technology transfer towards the U.S. Army and vice versa. So there is a strong integration between military power and technology, and so between the political power and digital power. This is something that is terrible. This is terrible, because if the political power has in their hands all citizens' data, even the most private ones, the most personal ones, they can do whatever they want. They can do whatever they want, misinformation or anything else. Why is it so that ICE, the anti-immigrant American police, targets immigrants through Palantir, the company mentioned by Monica Maggioni? Palantir is the largest data gathering company in the world, and Palantir can tell you where a certain immigrant lives, the address, everything. So ICE then can go and get him. So this means integration between political power and digital power. When the electoral campaign of Trump took place, I saw a moment of that campaign on TV, and I remember Musk asking him, "Are you going to take to eliminate the rules?" And Trump said, "Yes, of course, I'm going to get rid of all the rules." Because the problem of the digital is that it is without rules. So when Vance came to Europe, He said, if you do not get rid of your own rules about the use of AI, we are going to apply sanctions to Europe. So AI is without rules, and that is why it can be perfectly intertwined with the political power because of this very same absence of rules, so they can do whatever they want. This is the main problem, the main issue. I think that this is dramatic because when you talk about political power, you do not talk about, a political power that is using the digital technologies. They are becoming the same thing. And in particular, this is very delicate, even more so, because anybody can make drones with AI. Even Ukraine is somehow fighting against such a powerful country as Russia with drones. A drone costing 20,000 euros can destroy a plane that costs millions and millions of euros. So what does this all mean? It means that even smaller countries can become dominating countries because they make use of a certain tool, of a certain instrument. So when the problems of separation between political power and digital power, is not made, it's dangerous because we need to do so to protect our freedom. So this is a kind of border towards freedom, a sign of freedom. We do not want to be controlled. We have the right not to be controlled. So democracy relies on the fact that the citizen controls the power, but not vice versa. This is democracy. If we put the digital power in the hands of politicians, of political powers in general, all this is not going to hold any longer because we don't know very much about the political power. Instead, the political power knows a lot about us. So we need to use and consider the Pope's message not as rhetoric, but as a commitment to fight for a fair regulation, safeguarding and protecting the fundamental rights of citizens. So we are talking about, the right to opaqueness, to opacity. So the citizens need to be reassured. They need to have guarantees about the protection of their data. And so otherwise, political powers would know everything about us and not vice versa. So I think that what the Pope said is very important and meaningful because its citizens should get reassurances. We need to be reassured. So we always talk very badly of ourselves, of Italy, of Europe, of the European Union. I think this is very bad. But when it comes to the EU is somehow preserving our rights. And no other countries in the world has done the same. No other country in the world. So we really need to fully understand the extent of this. A British philosopher told this anecdote. There is an old fish in the sea meeting two young fishes, and the old one says, "How is water today?" And the young fish says, "What is water?" And we say, well, where is AI? Is inside us, is around us, is everywhere. And well, we need it. But as any other useful thing, it can also be harmful. So when it comes to the separation between political power and digital power, this has to do with one of the biggest freedom-related issues of modernity.
Dopo torniamo sui due vostri interventi. Stefano Lucchini.
Stefano Lucchini, I come back to you, and then I'll go back to this connection between economy, politics, and technology. So economy has become, after the Second World War, a peace factor because commercial trades have become a sort of seeding element, reducing the level of conflict. And then we have reached the globalization. Is it still so today, or is the opposite happening? So economy has become a great source of opposition. Well, economy is a source of opposition, with no doubt, especially in some systems. But this is because some systems rely on taxes and also on the lack of something that instead is important. What Luciano Violante just said is very important, because we have a huge democracy manipulation risk. Because at the end of the day, if people can somehow get to the point of preferring to elect a certain person because that person can do something that is in their interest, well, that brings about major risks of several sorts, even economic risks. And I want to go back to something that maybe is closer to what the Pope said. I want to talk about Europe. A country is free is if it can defend itself and if it's energy independent. And we know that energy consumption levels are skyrocketing. That is why the data center building will be also strategic. But there is something else that we should not underestimate, the social aspect. In the past, the great revolutions occurred because some people forgot that, because the social aspect has been reinforced over time. So we need to find solidarity systems and social relevant systems that can also work as a guarantee for our democracies. Because yes, AI can play a role, but then people are people. So we need to somehow make it so that people will save us. But again, I am a quite optimistic person. I mean, I think that the social issue and resilience will mark the future of democracies. That's why we need to insist on that. And the more we somehow get closer to our principles and identities, as the Pope said yesterday, we may find a way of salvation. So we should become, more and more somehow like-minded. As the Pope, we should try to embrace his thoughts in this respect, because the human aspect will be the key to preserve our democracies. If we are going to be able to do so, we will be able maybe to save ourselves. When it comes to economic planning, well, this is crucial, as we all know. We definitely need to know precisely what we're going to need in 20 or 30 years. But economic planning can be even more crucial if combined to social planning. Nobody can be left behind. People should be put back at the heart of everything. People should become the point of reference of any political choice being made in the future. People, needs to be considered in terms of dignity, and our constitution that is extraordinary, preserves people's dignity. So we certainly need to, keep treasuring confidence and trust in order to somehow protect ourselves from the drifting effects of some phenomena. Thank you. Well, let's have the last round of answers. It goes without saying that the Pope is asking for a moral and aware commitment, and as a consequence, that implies a certain level of knowledge, because You cannot face something you don't know, and political choices should be based on understanding situations and knowing situations. So, Luciano Violante, I come to you. Well, considering the current scenario, we see a growing dissemination of the narrative that, democracy is an awakening factor. So the states where there seems to be less democracy seems to be more effective and functional. So all that said, how is it possible instead to show and explain to what extent democracy is a factor of strength?
Well, there's a lot to read about these issues, really. But if you allow me, I would like to refer to my personal opinion with respect to one of the roots of the difficulties of democracy. Let's go back to the Enlightenment. Robespierre, at some point, decided to dedicate the Cathedral of Notre Dame to the goddess of reasoning, and then to the Supreme Being. What does that mean? The Enlightenment was the most lay event, the most separative between the church and the powers, but at some point it felt the need for a metaphysical foundation. So I think that if that happens, in that case, we as liberal Democrats, at what point are we? I believe, and I'm sorry to say this, that we have fallen back to relativism. We have forgotten about the importance of something. You know that I am a believer, but I am not a religious person. You have a religion, so think about the relationship between democracy and religion. A moral value is necessary in democracy. It is not enough to have just a set of rules. As I was saying before, I found this speech by Solzhenitsyn in 1865 in Harvard, who said, "You Europeans fell into juridicism. Everything is jurisdiction, and this has two limitations. If there is jurisdiction, you can't tell someone to renounce their part of their jurisdiction because they want, and there is not just a right to rule the world because there is also morals." And that was stated in the 19th century, not today. So I think that we have to go back seriously to this relationship between democracy and religion. You know why? Because others are doing it. Now I'm going to read the kind of prayer that in 2025, in February, a group of evangelicals recited in the Oval Office in Donald Trump and Kirill statement before Putin. You will see the similarities between these. The American prayer said, "With gratitude and humility, we pray for President Trump. You appointed him and you anointed him in a moment like this. And we ask you to cover him with the blood of Jesus, giving him the power to carry out a program of rectitude and justice, truth and love. Protect him from evil as he supersedes our nation with the defensive barrier of our Jewish Christian values, and fulfill in his life your design." And here now is Kirill's statement before Putin. Putin defined wholly the war against Ukraine and claimed that the Russian army defended the country because of the God order. And Kirill said we were lucky enough to live in an era where the head of state is also an Orthodox, a sincere believer, an Orthodox ruler, not because just of the protocol, but because he's a true believer. Vladimir Milotovich, that is Putin. And all this confirms, Kirill adds, that a miracle wanted by God has manifested itself. Through the prayers of the saints, the martyrs, and the confessors, the divine grace has manifested in our country. These are similar statements. And I was really disgusted the other day to watch on TV that the Israeli militia that were sent to defend the colonies, they were praying together with the aggressors, not the people that were attacked. So what I want to say that is authoritarian powers are using religion as tools for their moral force, but they are immoral subjects. However, we do not talk about religion when we talk about democracy. I know that a secular system is required, that's for sure, but in religion there are profound moral values that are what is missing in the democracy of the rules. We need this moral push. The love you are talking about, what is it? It is respect and listening. That is love. When there is respect and when there is listening, there is love. If one of these things is missing, there is no love. This is true for in private life, between partners and friends in every place in the world. So we have really to go back to the relationship between religion and democracy and politics. It has to be a clean relationship because that gives a moral strength to democracy. And it helps us to go beyond the moral objection of Nietzsche. And it gives us a right way to give strength to democracy, which does not come from rules. It is from the morals, ethics. We can believe in something that it goes beyond to build tomorrow. But tomorrow can be built if we have a moral strength inside. Otherwise, we only build our own present for ourselves. You don't think about what tomorrow is going to happen. So I think that what's going on around us, what the Pope said, and what this big hall represents should push us to do this, to abandon relativism. It is not true that everything is equal to everything. It is not true that everything is equal to everything. We have to make distinctions, and to make distinctions we need moral criteria. And to stand on one side or on the other, we need moral criteria. Otherwise, one can be wrong. You can support the one that is more advantageous for you, not the one that is fair to you. That's the problem that we have today, and we have to work a lot in this direction. This reflection by Luciano Violante has been expressed the first time in quite articulate manner in the dialogue between Ratzinger and Habermas. Habermas recognized after many years that you can even do not have a religious faith, but you have to acknowledge that an authentic religion is also a strength for democracy. Monica Maggioni, let's go back to the system of powers. Democratic countries, to some extent, seem to be not so strong right now, both from a technological point of view and from an economic point of view. Do they have the possibility to reaffirm themselves? maybe not in the interest of being more powerful, but in the interest to be able to affirm at a global level a space of liberty for everybody? The answer is yes, and it is strictly connected to the reflection that Luciano Violante has just expressed. If there is a way to interpret today's world, it can be found in this relationship, which can be cynical when we take religion as a level of power. So you mentioned, Bernhard, the adjective authentic, referring to that conversation that is omitted from the sin, because it is the cynical use of religion as a lever for power, and there is an absolute need to recover its authenticity. That is that moral tension. Going back to what we have said about these new figures that tend to have the dominion of our contemporary time, because even within the world of artificial intelligence, this relationship with moral and ethics is a very strong debate, which has even become a kind of industrial debate among the various protagonists of AI. You have probably read about the debate that occurred last spring with Anthropic, when the Anthropic and the Amadeus brothers warned that be careful, we are getting to the point that humanity can be called into question, and maybe we have to recover the capacity of self-regulation. And again, some subjects really were shocked just by the mentioning of the word rules. But that is about democracy, really. In the world of artificial intelligence, in these hours, in these words, in these days, there is this statement that I had to take note of because it is such an old sentence, Cold War where reciprocal ensured destruction was mentioned, which is the basis with which in the nuclear era it was decided that after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, humanity must be protected by the fact that another situation like that may occur again. That's why some international agreements were made on deterrence based on this sentence. It's really hard for me to repeat that. It is the ensured reciprocal destruction, because it is the very negation of existence, the very negation of the relationship between states. It is the very negation of human beings' life, but we got back to that. So why is it important to understand who the actors are, what countries are moving in this field, what are the power logics, why the Magnificat Humanitas text is so important? Because this is a time when the first battle is engaged in the field of awareness, self-awareness. I was lucky enough to go back to the job I really love. That is, I study, I report, I talk to people. A couple of months ago, I interviewed a person that I had been chasing for months, Ayusha Benjo, that is one of the fathers of artificial intelligence. We have Geoffrey Hinton, Ali Khan, and Joshua Benjo. Joshua Benjo could be one of the many billionaires that we saw before in Luciano Violante's slide, but he decided to stay at university. He still teaches in Canada. It is as if he had realized immediately that all that they were studying was so dangerous and so frightening and potentially extraordinary and very positive, but at the same time with some elements of enormous danger, that one had to be divided. And it had to stay at the university, not in the industry, to stay there and study. This interview with Joshua Benjo was really revealing. If you ask me, what did you do in that year? Well, I talked to him. In many points, he warned me about what's going on in the next few months, because we will see AI to some extent will try to escape its creator. That is, you give it a task, but it is so convinced to do better than you have told it, it will get outside the boundaries you have placed to discover solutions and new systems. I was told this last May, at the beginning of May, and the Wall Street Journal last week we had a big title that read the most frightening week of artificial intelligence, because 2 months after my conversation with Joshua Bengio, that's what happened. Something similar happened with Alibaba, and now something similar happened a couple of times in 2 big companies. I want you to listen to a statement that he gave me. I'm not just preaching against artificial intelligence. I am a great friend of artificial intelligence. I work every day with it, but we have to be aware. Awareness is the key word. And so, well beyond mere fear, let's listen to what he told me about the potential fear. I think there is a second great danger, less extreme but more probable. I'm referring to the use of artificial intelligence on the part of governments to dominate society, to devoid democracy, or to alter geopolitical world balance. If 1 or 2 countries were able to dominate economically, militarily, and influence the public opinion of other countries, in fact, they could control the world. It would be the end of our capacity to have our voice heard, which is the foundation of democracy. Imagine Hitler or Stalin with the power available, the power that artificial intelligence is giving now. Imagine what they could do with artificial intelligence that we will have in 1, 2, 3 years to design new weapons and to monitor every single citizen. All this is linked to the first point, that is, intelligence gives power. Today, we don't have social guarantees, we don't have technical guarantees that are enough to make sure that that power is not going to damage our institutions and our future. This is an important part in the Pandora's box. He said basically that the Pandora's box is open. Those who have information in the power, and this is like the old story, but now the difference is that we have such an amount of information that world domination is possible. And so the country that can have absolute control may even get to control the world. And so to call into question everything that is at the basis of our mutual living together. He gets to very catastrophic tones in the rest of the interview, but let's stop here and think about that. So what can we do? Do we just have to listen to these things and say, okay, that's it, there's nothing else we can do? No. The point here is awareness. So it's not possible that I can listen to political discourse that 90% is just filled with vagaries and problems that can be solved, and only 10% is sent to this kind of thinking, because this is the great challenge. And again, I think it's even horrible to repeat it. It's not a way to indulge in you. The Holy Father doesn't need me, but it's crazy that the Holy Father has to come to say, this is the battle, ladies and gentlemen, not of the future, but of today, of humanity. You know something? At the beginning, I showed you the interconnections, and I referred to 3 years ago, because 3 years ago, nothing of what we're talking about and what is happening could be imagined. What Joshua Bengio told me in May occurred in July, so we do not have time. So we have to ask for choices, answers, awareness. There is still a possible part of the path. And as Stefano Lucchini said at the beginning, many people have gathered at the meeting during these days because of the hope, of the morale, of the choices, of the capacity. They don't want to undergo all this passively. We have to ask for more awareness, more action, more capacity of choice, because in there is still some choice that is possible, and the choice is to be human, so we can still do something.
Prima di fare l'ultima.
Before asking the last question to Stefano Lucchini, I would like to emphasize that what Monica Maggioni said is not just intentional. It is possible that in the next few days we will listen to a European entrepreneur working in the biggest consortium in Europe of new technologies, telling us that the AI Act of the European Union is a competitive advantage, and that all the employees of his company will be asked to read the Magnificat Humanitas, because that's an important criterion for choice, and it is for a sustainable economy, not against economy. The last question is indeed about sustainable economy. In Europe, we have such a big economic pressure. We have to compete with economies that are totally without rules, that are subsidized, and that really threatening our own sustainability. At the same time, Europe, besides being the only democratic space in the world, it is the only place where there is a universalistic welfare system. And so this is also important for a competitive and sustainable economy. But can we still be like this? Well, absolutely yes. Objectively, we are talking about the future, and the future is always built through some degree of imagination. So we have to believe a lot in our Europe, and Europe must be more and more united, but we also have to be more and more united among ourselves. So trust and awareness are important factors, but the future belongs to those that can listen, especially those that can include. We don't have to leave anyone behind, and we as Europe can be a good example, just like the one mentioned by the Holy Father. Let us try to have everybody on board. Nobody must be left behind. The dignity of people must be respected, and everybody has to have the possibility to take someone with him who has been having some difficulties. So if we can have this instead of prevailing extremist sentiments in Europe, then I'm sure that we can do it. I'm quite optimistic, and I'm sure that we will get through this, because if we have awareness, this can help us get through this. So if we consider that the human, the person, as Monica Maggioni has just said, if we try to have the human at the center of everything, I think that it can allow us to say that we are stronger sometimes. Otherwise, over time, such a distance, such a risk of leaving someone behind may re-emerge easily, and we have seen it in history. How many revolutions have occurred like this? Robespierre was then self-eliminated in a way by what he wanted, and I even think about Charles Magnus and the Abbey of Farfa becomes imperial because it had to be a reference to be crowned there. But then there is an agreement, and things can be settled. And I'm optimistic because the masters of the world are young people. And I want to tell all the young people present here today to think about their future, and we have to be able to give you the possibility to think about your future, because if young people are aware of all this, they will be able to create a better world, which is what we all want to have. My last 2 minutes, I'd like to give them to my guests, my other colleagues. I will have 2 more minutes, but I leave them to Luciano and Monica because of the extraordinary messages that they have given us today. Well, besides all the content that has been discussed here, the message is that if we want to love, we have to know. We cannot leave our children, our nephews, if we do not commit ourselves to know more about the basis of the future that we are building now for tomorrow. Then we can talk about the responsibility, etc. But love is a sentiment, but it is also a big question of awareness, as we have said this evening. And so, to some extent, this session is the expression of the title that we wanted to give it. And I'm glad that we could address some enormous challenges that really go beyond ourselves, but also for having considered the awareness that each of us together can be an actor in history if we don't let ourselves go to resignation or to indifference, or if we don't get into an aggressive polarization that for many people has become really the gateway for this. That is why that an authentically experienced religion, as we have heard this evening, and as Pope Leo don't just talk about but testifies, is really a source of hope and certainty. Thank you all.
Questo è un luogo che genera dialogo,
qualcuno che si impegna, che si batte,
che approfondisce la conoscenza e sostiene la fiducia. È un crocevia dove si incontra chi desidera il vero, il bello, il giusto e il bene. È una testimonianza di speranza nel cuore ferito del presente. E tutto questo
proporre con la propria vita
esiste anche grazie a te.
In mezzo al rumore serve qualcosa che duri.
El Papa León XIV.
Storie vere. Incontri che cambiano la vita. Persone che costruiscono. Uno sguardo originale su ciò che accade. Tutto questo è Tracce. Ora anche in una nuova versione digitale. Per raccontare sempre più storie di gente che vive. Tracce, la rivista internazionale di Comunione e Liberazione.
È bello avere quello che ti serve quando ti serve. Come il programma Easy Token Collection, per accumulare punti da trasformare in premi. Easy Bank, la banca digitale di Intesa Sanpaolo.
In mezzo al rumore serve qualcosa che duri.
El Papa León XIV.
Storie vere. Incontri che cambiano la vita. Persone che costruiscono. Uno sguardo originale su ciò che accade. Tutto questo è Tracce. Ora anche in una nuova versione digitale. Per raccontare sempre più storie di gente che vive. Tracce, la rivista internazionale di Comunione e Liberazione.
È bello avere quello che ti serve quando ti serve. Come il programma Easy Token Collection, per accumulare punti da trasformare in premi. Easy Bank, la banca digitale di Intesa Sanpaolo.